This petite and amiable lady is a giant in comparative constitutional law. Professor Cheryl Saunders has acquired a formidable reputation in this field with her towering presence. How did her legendary tale begin? Professor Cheryl Saunders was born in Quetta, then part of British India, now a district of Pakistan. She lived in Japan for 2 years before settling in Australia when she was 5. With relatives living in different countries, she got to travel the world quite often. Her childhood experience has affected how she sees the world.
You grow up knowing where you were born and where you spent some of the early years of your life, whether you actually remember them or whether you just think you remember them. But in addition, because my parents had links elsewhere, we had grandparents elsewhere, we travelled from time to time when I was a somewhat older child. It did give you a feeling that you were connected with the world. And you know, funnily enough, I've always taken that for granted as just something that was part of me. Until some years ago, my eldest grandson was interviewing me for a school project. And he said, you know, was there anything about my early life that shaped what I'd subsequently done? And suddenly I thought, yes, that's absolutely right. You know, the circumstances of my sort of birth and early childhood have absolutely shaped the attitudes I've had to the world, I think.
Her curiosity about the world has been obvious since her teenage years. She loved making friends with young people from across the globe. So even though she was living in Australia, she knew early on how big the world is.
Curious about the world, interested in the world, wanting to engage in the world. I mean, when I was in my, I don't know, early teens maybe, I went through a pen pal phase. You know, of course, this is well before computers and so on. And I had about 20, 30 pen pals around the world that I used to write to. And again, that was just something that happened. And I think I would connect that to just being comfortable and interested and thinking that there was a world out there.
Professor Saunders chose to study law mainly because of her interest in history.
Very early on, when I was in my latter years at school, and I think it was driven by an interest in history as much as anything else. I read a lot of history in those days. I studied historical subjects, and law in one way or another comes into many of those things. And so the idea of studying law grew out of that, which in some ways was surprising because we had absolutely no lawyers in the family. And my mother was fairly bemused about this and you know, kept saying, maybe you don't really want to do that. But in fact, I did it and enjoyed it enormously.
Law covers a wide range of issues. Professor Saunders was drawn to public law, particularly laws that impact government policies.
But there was something about the public law subjects as I was doing law that I really enjoyed. In the way in which the curriculum was organised in those days, you dealt with administrative law, in other words, the law affecting the way government decisions are made, before dealing with constitutional law. So I dealt with constitutional law rather later in my law degree, but really enjoyed both of those subjects.
When Professor Saunders decided to pursue a PhD program, she chose to study constitutional law and started to see how fascinating it was.
I talked to a few people about what a suitable topic might be. It turned out to be a topic that was related to federalism. It was about dealing with the relations between levels of government in the Australian Federation. And that was a topic that I found very interesting at the time and that in many ways remains one of my enduring interests in public law, although now I'm interested in the relations between governments in any federation and also in the relations between governments more generally.
After she started teaching at the University of Melbourne, Professor Saunders put her creativity and passion to good use. She proposed establishing the Centre for Comparative Constitutional Studies in Melbourne Law School. Set up in 1988, the centre was the first academic institution for comparative constitutional law in the region. Her outstanding performance enabled her to break down gender barriers and become the first female professor at Melbourne Law School.
I don't feel, unlike many women, I don't feel that I had to struggle very hard to become a professor. I was in a law school that was rapidly developing with some very interesting and innovative ideas. That suited me perfectly. Around about that time, I suggested that we found a centre to focus on comparative constitutional studies, of which I was the director. I was encouraged from the outset to do that and supported both by the law school and by the university itself in that endeavour. At some stage during that time, I was given a personal chair in law. It wasn't even a position I had to apply for. It was a university position awarded to people who they thought were performing extremely well. And so that was a wonderful development as far as I was concerned. So I didn't need to struggle to get to that point, for which I'm very grateful, because that's not the experience of many women.
Professor Michael Crommelin has known Professor Saunders since the 1970s. He pointed out that the center exists because of the foresight Professor Saunders showed. It helped the University of Melbourne gain an important position in comparative constitutional law, as its influence continues to extend beyond Australia.
It was very important indeed. Now, Cheryl was ahead of her time. She recognised, I think better than most others at that time, what the potential of this was. But the field was starting to be recognised around the world, and the importance of it grew very rapidly, and she really established this centre during the very early stages of that development, and of course was a leader herself, and the centre was a significant contributor internationally as well as in Australia.
The current director of the centre, Professor Adrian Stone, noted that the centre has nurtured many experts and is a place where the study of comparative constitutional law flourishes.
I think it means that we have in the law school a really sizable group of constitutional scholars who are teaching and working both in Australian constitutional law and are interested and expert in constitutional law globally. So I just think that changes the intellectual environment here. It means that we teach our students with a more comparative perspective, with a greater sensitivity to what's going on in the world, that we engage with each and learn from each other on those questions, and that we're also able to engage with the broader academic community in the country and in the region. So I think that's been really important in producing really a generation now of constitutional scholars who've either been in the centre or who've come through the centre with a global focus.
Professor Saunders likes being a teacher, especially when she interacts with graduate students, because she can explore interesting topics and brainstorm with them.
I enjoy the challenge of marshalling your ideas in a way that other people can understand. And in a way, teaching in a university is one of the best forums for that particular challenge. But a lot of the teaching I do at the moment is at a postgraduate level. So I teach in the master's degree at the university, and I also have a number of doctoral students. And one of the great things about teaching in the master's degree at Melbourne, at least, is that you can devise new subjects in areas that you're curious about. You're actually trying to get your own thoughts together about it. If you turn it into a master's subject, you have the wonderful experience of being able to explore those ideas with graduate students.
Professor Saunders is one of the few people who highlighted the Asia-Pacific region in comparative constitutional law studies. when the Center for Comparative Constitutional Studies was just founded. She has shown a special interest in the Asia-Pacific region due to its proximity to Australia and her friendship with many people in Asia.
Australia is closer to Asia than any other part of the world. I've always had as I look back, I've had friends in Asia, links with Asia of various kinds for a very long time. I've travelled to Asia. When we set up the Centre for Comparative Constitutional Studies in the late 1880s, at that stage, we just had a program. One of our 4 main programs was on Asia-Pacific constitutional systems, where we ran conferences across the region, bringing together constitutional scholars and practitioners from different Asian and Pacific countries on particular themes, and we published an annual yearbook of Asian developments in the Asia-Pacific.
During the 1990s, Professor Saunders started visiting many places in the Asia-Pacific. It was a very forward-looking step in comparative constitutional law.
The Asia-Pacific region, the breadth of it. Now, of course, Cheryl hasn't concentrated only on the Asia-Pacific region, but that is an important dimension that she, along with others, promoted very successfully, and I think with real significance in terms of constitutional development in our part of the world.
The cases Professor Saunders has participated in fully demonstrate the Asia-Pacific's diversity in constitutionalism. For instance, East Timor and Myanmar had completely different constitution-making experiences. That's because each country has its own challenges. When East Timor gained independence from Indonesia, it needed a new constitution.
Take a country like East Timor. That's a country that had no choice but to draw up a new constitution because it had been occupied by Indonesia for a very long period of time, before that by the Dutch. And through those very heady events that took place in Indonesia, as Indonesia itself began to democratise, so East Timor had a referendum and voted to be independent. And so at that point you have a polity about to become an independent state, certainly going to be recognised by other states in the world, but without a constitution of its own. So in that situation, of course, you have no choice. You can't say, well, we just amend what we presently have. You are committed to drawing up a new constitution.
As the government of East Timor had its own ideas about consulting foreign systems, and the UN was also involved to offer help, the way it created its constitution was rather unique.
The Liberation Party, Fretlin, had some very fixed ideas, I think, about what the constitution would look like. They were drawing on experience in Portugal and in Mozambique, with the Portuguese influence in Mozambique. And the UN also provided a framework for the East Timorese constitution-making process. It sort of administered East Timor, in a sense, while the constitution was drawn up. So it was a very distinctive constitution-making process.
The process Myanmar went through was much more complicated. Before the recent military coup, Myanmar had a constitution made in 2008, but it was not a democratic one. Many seats in parliament were reserved for the military, which had penetrated the government. In addition, after gaining independence, Myanmar was plunged into a civil war, followed by peace negotiations. The negotiations involved constitutional issues and ran parallel with the constitutional development led by the central government.
While the Constitution of 2008 was in operation, particularly after the election of the Suu Kyi government, at the same time there was this Panglong peace process going on. And many of the matters that were being discussed between the warring groups in that peace process were issues of a constitutional nature. will we have a federal system? Would that be a basis upon which peace could be built? And if so, what would the federal system look like? Because federal systems come in a variety of different forms. And so what was going on in Myanmar was extremely distinctive also. Sort of parallel tracks, one for the development of the constitution, another for the search for a peace agreement with some constitutional characteristics. You could see at the time, or you could suspect at the time, that those two processes ultimately would have to come together. But for the moment, that has all been derailed by the military takeover.
Professor Saunders holds the view that the Asia-Pacific region has long been neglected. In comparative constitutional law studies, the efforts that she and like-minded experts made helped direct attention to constitution building in this area.
Interest in drawing Asia into the sphere of comparative constitutional law was still in its fairly earlier stages. There were a number of us who'd been involved with it for some time, but there was less interest in and knowledge about Asia. I think that's changing. But Asia is such a large and complex region in all sorts of ways, but including in constitutional systems, that even to generalize about Asia is rash. If you like to compare East Asia, for example, with South Asia, Taiwan and Japan and South Korea with, say, India and Pakistan, you can see the huge difference in constitutional systems. And then once you start thinking about the Southeast Asian countries and the countries of the Pacific and so on, then the diversity becomes even greater. And it's not just diversity in the constitutions themselves. It's diversity in the circumstances of the countries, the way in which governance arrangements fit into them, the customs that have developed there, sometimes over long periods of time.
Professor Saunders has not only dedicated herself to studying comparative constitutional law, but has also applied her knowledge to practical use. Both local governments and international organizations often consult her for her expertise. One of the international organizations she works with a lot is the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. She has served as its senior technical advisor for 6 years, mainly to advise on the implementation of constitution-building projects.
Most recently, on quite a number of occasions in Myanmar before the recent military coup. And they, in turn, how do they do that? Well, they talk to the Myanmar legislature, talk to the Myanmar government, what sorts of things would you like some sort of international assistance with? And then if I'm a useful person, they call on me. But there are international NGOs who do these things. Sometimes the Australian government has asked me to go and do something. So these requests come from all over the place. And as you become a little better known, you may get sort of requests out of the blue sometimes.
The director for the Asia and the Pacific region at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance has been working with Professor Saunders for years. Her close observation convinced her that Professor Saunders has magical powers.
Cheryl's superpower is her curiosity, and I think that leads her to ask the right questions, and so increasing understandings all around. She's interested in what's going on in the world of constitutions and beyond, and she's genuinely interested in what people has to say. See the kind of potential, even in a seed of an idea. I think that's pointing out to you what is really interesting in what you are saying, and what is it that small idea may be leading to. She's someone who is able to really see some connections when others do not at first, and bring it all together. And at the same time, she's certainly an authority. I mean, she listens and she consults, but she's very affirmative on her views as well.
When it comes to helping other countries build their constitutions, Professor Saunders adheres to her own set of beliefs and principles. There are many discussions on how to study comparative constitutional law. Some focus on similarities, while others emphasize differences. For Professor Saunders, the most important thing is to compare the ways constitutions are implemented and make this field more diverse as a result.
I understand perfectly well the forces that there are for universalism and similarity, but I also think the more you focus on constitutions in operation and the way in which they took their present form, the more you understand that there are also some very significant differences, and that really engaging in comparative constitutional law in a way that enables you to realise the benefits of it requires you to accept diversity as well as the forces for similarity.
The gene pool is a metaphor for her methodology of comparative constitutional law that embraces constitutional experiences from across the world.
Now that brings us to the constitutional gene pool. Of course, if you spend your time comparing fairly similar countries, then the differences between those countries are going to be less, and certain methodologies that match that reality are likely to be used. The broader the range of countries you take into account, the more complicated the process of comparison is, the greater the diversity, the more you may need to think about the choice of comparators and the way in which you go about trying to develop an understanding. I think that in order to make generalizations about the world in which we live, we need to take a wide range of countries into account, but that certainly complicates comparative method.
Professor Saunders believes that to help a country build a constitution requires more than just transplanting existing institutions or political systems. A country's unique characteristics must be considered for the Constitution to truly function there.
I mean, it's an old story in comparative law and certainly in comparative constitutional law that you can't just take a phenomenon, constitutional or political, from one country and put it into another. It has to fit, and it has to be understood and absorbed and owned by the people who have to live under this regime. So my approach, such as it is, has always been to try to understand as well as I possibly can the context of the place where I am, where I've been invited to come and assist, and then to think quite hard about what it is that I might bring to that process that could be useful, and how it could be best understood by the people who are developing whatever aspect of their constitutional arrangements happens to be an issue.
As Professor Saunders has a very clear understanding of the role she plays in the constitution-building process of other countries, there are principles she sticks to in terms of the attitude she should have.
The idea of what I actually do with constitution building is not really go and help them to do X. It's to provide whatever comparative knowledge I have that might be useful. And that comparative knowledge might be substantive or it might be about process. But I very firmly take the view that I'm not there with all the answers. I'm there to provide whatever assistance I can for people who, in the end, will have to take responsibility for this system of government and live under it.
In fact, many countries in the Asia-Pacific region were once colonies, so discussing how to assist them in making a constitution remains a delicate subject. Professor Saunders has the rare ability to truly connect with local people.
Kind of constitutional advising that comes out of the global north in which the global north kind of sees itself as lending expertise to countries where constitutionalism is developing and taking quite a strong and prescriptive role. Nothing could be further from Cheryl Saunders' actual style insofar as I have observed it. I mean, really central to the way she understands constitutions and constitution making is that they absolutely and profoundly have to be the people's own bargain. Now, that's not to say that there's not a lot that someone with her level of expertise can lend, but it is a way of making sure that she's more or less on tap. But there is absolutely no sense in which the forms that dominate the global north are seen to be desirable forms for countries newly coming to constitutionalism. And that sounds sort of obvious when you say it like that, but it's actually surprisingly rare, and I think it's an absolutely standout quality of her in the field of constitution advising and constitution making.
As a renowned constitutional law scholar in Taiwan, Professor Junrong Ye also benefited from Professor Saunders' mentorship. They've known each other for more than 30 years. He thinks what is special about Professor Saunders is her attitude. She treats every country equally and believes their constitution-building experiences are equally valuable.
但是他的一个特点就是心态，他会认为这些地方是很宝贵的经验，发生过的事情，现实面临的议题，每个国家都不一样，然后他会去珍惜，说这些都是很重要的。那这样子的内容，你认为它重要，你才会关注它。然后这些内容不是静态的在那里，是要透过人有感知、有体会，然后传递出来。
Due to Professor Saunders' focus on Asian countries, including Taiwan, Professor Ye got a chance to share Taiwan's constitutional experiences on a global stage. That was an occasion he treasured dearly. He made sure to give constitutional scholars around the world a clear introduction of Taiwan's unique constitutional circumstances.
我台湾的问题，我可以在一个重要的国际会议里面，我能够呈现出来。然后当我呈现出来的时候，我等于像是有一个国家要去参加万国博览会一样，我把我的文物，我把我的什么要呈现在国际里面，所以不会很用心的去呈现我台湾这个 case， 而且心里会心想说，既然我要呈现台湾这个 case， 那这些其他国家的人要能够听得懂，所以我要竭尽所能的去说出这背后是什么样一个道理，不是只告诉人家说我的法律怎么规定，这谁都会。所以你要脉络化。
Because Professor Saunders constantly reaches out to people related to constitutional law, including government officials, legislators, practitioners, and scholars, she's become exceptionally good at communicating with others. She knows how to use simple language to explain complicated ideas.
Very relaxed. She is very well informed, of course, but very skillful in making her point, in demonstrating the importance of whatever the point is that she's trying to make, and getting the point across clearly and simply. I mean, this is a difficult field, and to achieve simplicity in the expression of key issues, ideas, is a very, very valuable skill.
Professor Saunders has headed the International Association of Constitutional Law, or IACL, for many years. When the IACL was just established, it served as a bridge between communist and non-communist countries. Professor Saunders' involvement began in the early 1990s. At that time, the Berlin Wall just fell, setting off a constitution-building movement worldwide and giving the IACL an opportunity to extend its influence. As president of the IACL, Professor Saunders was determined to expand its global footprint, so she moved its secretariat to Africa. This position required proficiency in both English and French. Therefore, she worked really hard to learn French.
But the IACL is a bilingual association, French-English, and so that was the impetus really for me to take on the task of learning French, which I enjoyed enormously. I can't say that I ever reached anything like the level that I would wish that I had reached, but the sheer process of learning another language and seeing how language shapes the way in which you think and the way in which you express yourself has been useful for me, not just in relation to French, but more generally. I don't speak a lot of other languages, but at least to understand that language has genuine significance in comparative constitutional law has been a very valuable lesson, and I'm grateful to the IACL for forcing me to learn it.
Professor Stone has known Professor Saunders for years. She thinks Professor Saunders is someone always ready to put herself in others' shoes.
She learnt French for the purpose of engaging in that association, and one thing that she taught me through that was how important it is to people that you show them that you are prepared insofar as you possibly can to step into their world and into their world of you. And language is a really important way to do that.
Her contributions to the field of international constitutional law earned her the National Order of the Legion of Honor, the highest honor bestowed by the French government on foreign nationals. In fact, many countries truly appreciated Professor Saunders' continuous assistance over the years. So it's not surprising that the Australian government also awarded her the Officer of the Order of Australia and the Centenary Medal. No matter how many accolades Professor Saunders has received, she remains a hard worker. Her job needs her to travel frequently, which is no small task for a woman. But Professor Saunders seems to have inexhaustible energy, something her younger colleagues found hard to emulate.
The first time I ever went to an overseas conference where Cheryl Saunders also was, I went with a small group of us from the University of Melbourne, and we all went to Greece, where Cheryl was presiding as president over the World Congress of Constitutional Law. And she did this in French and in English, and she was the head of the whole conference, and the rest of us were at the end of the conference. We were just there as participants and to give papers. We were all absolutely exhausted, but I can remember Cheryl bounding out of the final session without a hair out of place, having had a wonderful time, and really showing that, giving the appearance that this enormously demanding week had not taken any toll on her at all. And over the course of the next week, the rest of us all got a bit sick, and she, of course, came home without a scratch on her.
Although many women see Professor Saunders as their role model, she never stresses the influence she has as a woman. But she has her own take on how women can contribute to the development of a constitution. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Professor Saunders had to put her travel plans on hold and has been staying in Australia for quite some time. In her free time, she enjoys gardening and being with her family. As a dog lover, she suffered a huge loss when unexpectedly losing her dog early in the pandemic. But she adopted a puppy right away.
Early months of 2020, dog died. And I was so sad that I immediately, like a woman on the rebound, insisted we get another puppy. And so we've had this little energetic dog ever since, and he needs a lot of exercise. So I do a lot of walking with him, and that's a very good thing to do because I actually think when I walk as well. So just wandering through some of the beautiful parks that there are around here with the dog is quite a relaxing thing to do.
Though Professor Saunders doesn't talk much about how she successfully broke down gender barriers in the legal profession, as a woman, she has a unique insight into how women can contribute to constitution and peacemaking.
Women may have particular contributions to make. It's much the same in peacemaking as in constitution making. Women have primary responsibility very often for children and families and the home, and have a huge interest in the peaceful resolution of matters. But they bring a very particular set of interests to the discussion, and it is very often said that it's important for those reasons that women are involved in peace processes, and I would say that that is absolutely right. But again, you need to think about the involvement being substantive involvement, where they are really given a voice and engaged, rather than it just being a window dressing exercise.
Professor Saunders' research showed that women tended to focus on social issues, such as education and health. So it's crucial to promote women's participation in discussions on constitutional matters.
So I think it's very important, while we might say women are more likely to emphasise the importance of these social and economic rights and interests, to also understand that there are many ways by which they may be achieved. And it's important not to sideline women to those obvious sort of domestic issues, but encourage them to take an interest in the way in which the whole polity is going to operate under a new constitution.
Professor Saunders' achievements in comparative constitutional law studies have inspired many women to take an interest in constitutional law and nurtured a new generation of outstanding scholars.
I should also say not only was she the first woman professor here, but I think she may have only been the second or third woman professor in all of Australia. So it's easy to forget what a boundary breaker that was. Now, if you look around the Australian Constitutional Law Academy now, it's filled with women leaders. And that is in no small part due to the legacy of someone like Professor Saunders, both her example, but also her generous mentorship. And so we now have a completely different kind of legal academy, thanks to the boundaries that she broke.
The breakthroughs made by Professor Saunders enabled the Melbourne Law School to grow and thrive. To understand the role constitutions play in global affairs, both theoretically and empirically, she founded the Constitution Transformation Network and works with the International IDEA to host the Melbourne Forum regularly.
Melbourne Forum is now at its 7th year. Pre-COVID, we used to bring people physically together in countries across the region. The very first Melbourne Forum was held here in Melbourne, but others have been held elsewhere, in Colombo in Sri Lanka, in the Philippines, in Myanmar, for example. And out of the Melbourne Forum comes a very rich discussion. We've managed to set the forum up in a way that does away with long formal presentations and really tries to engender a genuinely rich discussion between people from these participating countries. And out of that come a series of quite short briefs to try and share the insights that we've developed in one way or another.
The Forum is a place where constitutional law experts from different countries can hold in-depth discussions. It also provides a platform for people to get to know each other.
Forum is also a forum that is bringing together people who would not meet otherwise, but has so much in common. Political leader from Aceh of Indonesia and from Mindanao of the Philippines, comparing notes about the arrangements for self-determination after a conflict, after a violent conflict, just for example. So the Melbourne Forum's role is really to provide a venue and a platform for these kind of meetings and exchanges.
The success of the Melbourne Forum can largely be attributed to the influence of Professor Saunders.
And the secret of success of the Melbourne Forum is certainly Cheryl Saunders, because attending such a Melbourne Forum is a time-taking exercise for the participants. But when Cheryl invites, when the high-flying busy people respond very positively, either they have met her already in the past or have always wanted to meet her, and so the Melbourne Forum provides that really that kind of opportunity to meet.
Professor Ye notes that Professor Saunders has been working hard for years to keep this platform available. Her support for young scholars has borne fruit in the academic circle. Take himself as an example. Years of participation in international forums on constitutional law led to a teaching position at the University of Melbourne. He also wrote a textbook with other constitutional law scholars on constitutionalism in Asia.
所以包括我在内，我也机会去那边上课，然后当他们的这个讲座教授，然后在里面，我记得我这本书。就是亚洲的宪法的教科书，我这本书触动了写的，跟其他学者共同把这本教科书，亚洲的第一本案例的书写出来的时候，我的新书发表会在哪里举行？不是在台湾，是在墨尔本大学，因为这本书的目标就是要把他们关注的整个亚洲做一个整合。所以它本身也是在呼应那样平台的观念。这个事情做出来的时候，Cheryl是用非常高兴的角度看到它。那为什么这样？为什么那么高兴？为什么他愿意去办这一个？因为他把我们这些作者都当成他的好朋友。
Professor Ye believes that Professor Saunders opened a door for him. It had a huge impact on how he approached constitutional law studies and which countries he would focus on.
我觉得那不是惊鸿一瞥，而是有机会碰到，然后他会开启一道门，就是有没有人是你碰过，然后也因为那样子的一个互动相遇，然后再来相知。甚至于相惜，然后慢慢你会发觉说，从事后的角度看，那就开启了一道门，甚至于开启了一片天。对人生、对努力的方向、对很多关注的事情，产生非常微妙的影响。那Cheryl Saunders就是一个这样的人。
Professor Saunders knows the different roles she should play when she meets people from different walks of life. Take democracy activists, for example. She inspired people who want to change society by sharing her knowledge.
Well, I think what is impressive about Cheryl is that when talking to academia, she's talking like an academic. And when she's talking with the political leaders, she knows how to be critical yet persuasive. And when talking with the democracy activists, she's sharing her vast knowledge, but she's always inciting hope. Always hope, and that's very impressive.
In the field of comparative constitutional law, Professor Saunders cuts a unique figure, because she's not only a theorist, but also a practitioner. Therefore, her contributions to comparative constitutional law are truly comprehensive.
The breadth of that is astonishing. And then you get the depth. I mean, she has been a major theorist in this area. She has made a very significant contribution to the legal theory in this area, whilst at the same time being involved in implementation. So there's a very strong practical application. Now, this is very, very unusual to get all these dimensions in the one person. Often you get outstanding theorists, of course. Often you get people whose applied work is highly significant, people who work in particular geographical regions rather than others. But Cheryl really has established an outstanding reputation in all aspects of the field.
Professor Saunders continues to find joy in her work in comparative constitutional law, mainly because she understands its importance.
It's important simply in the first place so that we can understand each other. Australia has a number of close neighbours. Those neighbours have very different systems of government, very different constitutional histories. Comparative constitutional law is one window into mutual understanding. But it's also useful for reform or for change. Anybody in the current world who's thinking of changing some aspect of their system of government is likely to look elsewhere, not necessarily to borrow what comes from elsewhere, but at least to think about it and to understand whether it has any application in their own circumstances. And I think there may be a third use as well, which is in this increasingly interdependent world, when we come together to make mutual arrangements, treaties, international institutions and so on, I think we need to understand each other's systems of government for that as well, because otherwise you can't come up with a mutually agreed process and institution so that you can move forward.
As the global divide seems to widen daily, Professor Saunders seeks to use comparative constitutional law to promote the exchange of ideas on different levels. She understands that learning more about other countries means learning more about ourselves. In this sense, the constitutional gene pool is a space every country can explore constantly until it finally finds its place.